Good morning. And welcome to Pacific Unitarian. We are basking in the afterglow of Reverend Chloe Breday's ordination. That was yesterday. How many people were here? Yay! For those few that were not here, we are so happy to see you today. We have a special guest today. The Reverend Dr. Everett Howe is our speaker. He hails from San Diego and is active with the First Unitarian Church of San Diego. He spends part of his time as a minister and part in research mathematics, an interesting combination. Maybe we will detect some math coming into his talk. My name is Leanne Hart. I am your worship associate. We represent progressive religious thought here in the South Bay. We welcome people of all creeds, races, sexual orientations, and gender identities. We honor the Tongva people on whose land this sanctuary stands. If you are here for the first time, we want you to know we have childcare for the preschoolers and religious education, or as we like to say, exploration for the school-aged children. It begins right after Story for All Ages. Today, we invite you to join us for brunch. The food ministry has organized an all-church potluck. So it's been many moons since everyone was invited to cook. Let's see how it goes. Okay, a few announcements. The Religious Education Committee is interviewing for the position of Religious Education Coordinator. Hopefully, we will have some good news to report before too long. The Minister Search Committee is preparing a congregational survey regarding your thoughts on what to look for in a new minister. The questionnaire will be arriving by email, so keep an eye out for it and please fill it out. We want everyone to have a chance to be heard on this special topic. We have a new event that will be held at the church next Sunday at 5 p.m. It is called Fall Equinox Sunset Ritual. It will be led by Kiki Wiley. So this ritual will celebrate the balance between darkness and light, connecting the traditions of today with those of our ancestors. So we would like to have you RSVP, and you can do that on the website or check out the newsletter, and it will tell you how to do that. Come on down at 5 o'clock next Sunday. The monthly book club will be discussing the book, The Dawn of Everything, on Thursday at 10:30 on the patio. And for all other news, please check the website and the newsletter. Okay, it is now time to light our chalice. These words by Adam Slate. We gather this morning as one community, a community united by common ideals: love, justice, diversity, freedom, mutual care, equity. Yet look around. Look at the faces around you. Each face represents an individual, every one of us with our own stories, needs, strengths, and faults. We light our chalice today to honor the common connection and also the uniqueness that lives within each of us. Thank you, Reverend. And now, Reverend Everett Howe will deliver some opening words.
The words of the Reverend Libby D. Stoddard. We have come into this room of hope where our hearts and our minds are open to the future. We have come into this room of justice where we set aside our fear to name every oppression. We have come into this room of love where we know that no lives are insignificant. We have come into this room of song where we unite our voices in somber and beautiful melodies of life. Welcome to worship.
Please stand as you are willing and able for our opening hymn, Once to Every Soul and Nation.
Once to every soul and nation comes to moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. Then to stand with truth is noble when we share its wretched crust. Ere that cause bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, then it is the brave one chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue, and the faith they have denied.
It is now time for Story for All Ages. Will the young people and the young at heart come on down to the carpet for a story by Reverend Howe?
Hello, how are you? Good to see you. So today I want to tell a story about a woman named Julia Ward Howe, that's her up there on this screen, and how she did something that she never thought she would be able to do. So in 1861, a long time ago, 160 years ago about, Julia lived in Boston, Massachusetts, on the other side of the country, with her husband, Samuel, and their 6 children. Samuel was a doctor and a social activist, so he helped try to make laws better so they would help more people. And Julia spent a lot of her time taking care of the home and their children because 160 years ago, that's what a lot of people thought women should do. But she also spent time writing. She wrote poems, she wrote plays, she wrote essays, and people knew that she was a good writer. Now, also at that time, the American Civil War was going on. It had just started. And the southern states thought that slavery should be legal, that people should be able to own other people. And the states in the north and the states in the west thought that they knew that that was wrong. So there was fighting going on, there were battles. And Julia wanted to do something to help in this fight against slavery, but she didn't really know what she could do. But, as it happens, Julia and Samuel were friends with the governor of Massachusetts. They were such good friends that he would come over and have dinner and then sometimes stay for a nap. And you have to be pretty good friends with someone to take a nap at their house. And one day, in 1861, the governor asked Samuel and Julia, would you like to come with me to go to Washington, D.C. to visit President Abraham Lincoln? And they said, yes, sure, we would love that. So they got in their carriage and they started the long trip to Washington, D.C. And since there was a war going on, the Southern Army wanted to attack Washington, and they were trying to get close to the city. So they had Northern soldiers stationed around the city to protect it. And as Julia and her friends drove closer to the city, they saw these soldiers, and some of them were singing. And one of the songs they sang, it was called John Brown's Body. And people don't know that song too much anymore these days, but the tune went dun 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 dun, and so on. And Julia's friends said, the soldiers like this song, but we're not so happy with the words. Julia, you're a poet. Could you write better words for this song? And she thought that sounded too hard. She had written poetry, but she felt that writing lyrics to a song just seemed hard and different. But sometimes our friends know what we can do better than we do. And as it happened, that night, in the middle of the night, Julia woke up in the dark and started thinking about words for the song. And she thought of a verse for the song. And then she thought of another verse, and then another verse. And she was laying there in bed with all of these words in her head, and she thought, if I fall back asleep, I'm going to forget all of this. So she got up in the dark, and she found a pen, and in the dark, she wrote out 6 verses to a song. Now, later on in this trip, they did actually meet President Lincoln, and Julia remembered this visit for the rest of her life. She said that she always remembered the sadness that she saw in President Lincoln's blue eyes. And she again thought, what can I do to help in this fight against slavery? And what she didn't know is that she already had helped, because the words that she wrote got published in a magazine a couple months later, and people started singing those words to the tune of John Brown's Body. They called this new song the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And soldiers, Northern soldiers, wherever they went, they sang this song. It spread all across the country. People in other countries heard it. People sing that song to this day, which is why I think you recognize the melody. And that is how Julia Ward Howe managed to help in the fight against slavery, even though she didn't think she could. So thank you for listening.
Going to change things up a little bit. We will now pause for our offertory. But before we do, let me tell you a little story. A newly ordained young reverend in the first days of her calling was attempting to console a widow of an eccentric man who had just died. Standing before the open casket, the nervous young reverend said, I realize that this must be very hard for you, Mrs. Bart, but just remember that what we see before us it's only, the husk, the shell of your dear husband. The nut has gone to heaven. In the spirit of the newly ordained, we will now pause to show our generosity and gratitude with our weekly offering. Thank you, choir. Please join me now in reciting the affirmation of gratitude. Here it is. Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for all those who share their gifts, for we are enriched by their giving. Let us also be grateful even for our needs, so that we may experience the generosity of others. We will now move on to our centering hymn, 1023, Building Bridges. Please remain seated.
Oh, this is a round, so we're going to sing it all together once so you can get the melody and the lyrics together. And then we're going to split, and anyone who identifies as male will sing after anyone who identifies as female has sung the first time. So I'll help lead any of the lower voices through that. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Let's do it again. Let's do it. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Building bridges, a nice one. Now we come to the time for candles of joys and sorrows. At this time, people are invited to come forward to light a candle and share a brief personal concern or joy, or you can light a candle in silence. I light this last candle for all the unspoken joys and sorrows.
Spirit of life, Spirit of love, let us pause here at the end of one eventful week and the beginning of another. Let us pause to take stock, to acknowledge all that has happened to us, to acknowledge the joys and sorrows that we have just heard and the ones that have remained unspoken. Let us think of the moments of loss, the moments of love, the moments of joy, and the moments of pain that we feel for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our neighbors, and for people across the world. We feel for the families of the people in Libya who lost their lives and their livings and their property because of the earthquake. We feel for the victims of floods, also in the Mediterranean. Having experienced harsh weather ourselves recently, we know how troubling this can be. And we feel for the students and the staff and the faculty of the University of North Carolina who, for the second time in a month, had a shooting lockdown. Finally, we feel for our country in its struggle to finally address these problems. Let us take a moment in silence to feel and think and consider of all of these lives, knowing that they are intertwined with our own, and that we should recall that we are sustained by a love that is stronger than we know. We call you, Spirit of life, Spirit of love. We create you from this community of hope to support us, to surround us, to sustain us in peace. Salam, shalom, peace. So in 2005, my wife and I walked into a Unitarian Universalist church for the very first time. I had never been part of a church community before then, and because I had grown up unchurched, as perhaps some of you have, there was a lot of basic church-going stuff that I had to figure out. But because I can sing and I can read music, the hymnals were a great lifeline for me. Everyone else might have already known Blue Boat Home by heart, but I could read the music and keep right up. So our hymnals became dear to me, and I paid a lot of attention to the music that we had in the services. And one thing that's hard to miss when you look through our hymnals is that they are full of songs about peace and reaching out, like Building Bridges, which we just sang. And we've got hymns that ask, when will the fighting cease? And hymns about forgiving one another and beginning again in love. We've got hymns that pray that we might be instruments of God's peace. We've got songs that tell us that while we may love our homes, other people in other countries love their homes just as much. And even our protest songs highlight our peacefulness. We are a gentle, angry people. So I distinctly remember the shock that I felt, I think it was in my first few months of attendance at this church, when I sang these words. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. This was not about peace and not about reaching out. No, this hymn says that there is good and there is evil, and you have to decide now which side you are on. And by the way, says the hymn, most people have chosen evil. The people in power have chosen evil, and choosing good may lead to your death. I have to say that that sentiment, those words, have taken on more meaning for me now than they did when I first heard them in 2005. Indeed, more meaning since I first preached about this song, which was 2 months before the 2016 election. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. That applies to so many issues right now. We have a revived movement for racial justice after Ferguson and after the murder of George Floyd, and at the same time, white supremacists have become more and more bold. We finally have marriage equality, and we have the state of Florida literally criminalizing some forms of health care for transgender people. And those are just two of so many issues of social justice that are calling out now for our attention. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. And how do we respond? Now, I'm an amateur historian. So when words from our hymnal seem so relevant to things that are happening today, I wonder who wrote those words and what issue were they facing to make them write something that is so strongly worded. And for Once to Every Soul and Nation, it turns out that the year was 1845, and the issue was slavery. At the end of 1845, Texas joined the United States that year as a state where slavery was legal, and thus expanded the area, the territory where slavery was legal greatly. I think it nearly doubled. And James Russell Lowell, the son of a Unitarian minister, wrote a poem expressing his strong feelings about the immorality of slavery. The poem appeared in the Boston Courier in December 1845 with the title, Verses Suggested by the Present Crisis. And it was immediately picked up by other abolitionist publications. And the poem's influence is felt to this day. The national magazine of the NAACP is called The Crisis, and it was named after this poem. Now, in 1880, 3 Unitarian ministers edited several stanzas of this kind of long poem and published them in a hymnal. In fact, this hymnal. And in 1916, their words were set to the music that we sang today. In 1993, the editors of our gray hymnal condensed the original 3 verses down into 2, and I think they made some of these changes partly to avoid references to God. Originally, the 3rd verse went something like this. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though her portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown, God is standing in the shadow, keeping watch above his own. Yet that scaffold sways the future. That's such a powerful line. Stand up for what is right, says the hymn. Even though you might die for your beliefs, God will see that you have not died in vain. So, we have this powerful hymn born out of one of the worst crises in our history that tells us to choose sides, to fight injustice, to not give an inch. And then we have building bridges. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. This song came from the early years of the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. It was an anti-war protest in England that lasted for nearly 20 years. It started in 1981 when the British government agreed to house cruise missiles at the Greenham Common Air Base. In May 1982, 250 women blockaded the base. By December 1982, 30,000 women encircled the base. In 1983, 70,000 people joined hands to form a 14-mile-long human chain connecting the airbase to a munitions factory. And in between those major events, protesters camped out around the perimeter of the base, and their peaceful protests inspired similar actions throughout Europe. So the song Building Bridges also recognizes the division between right and wrong, but instead of suggesting violent conflict, it speaks of a different way of making change, by reaching out to people that you disagree with in order to change their hearts and change their minds. So here's the question. How do we, as individuals and as a community, how do we decide which approach to take when we're faced with an injustice? Do we embrace conflict, knowing that we are fighting for good, or do we build bridges and hope that the relationships that we create will create lasting change? So let me tell you about someone important in our Unitarian Universalist history who embodies the tension between these two approaches. Julia Ward Howe, no relation. In our Time for All Ages, you heard the story of how Julia Ward Howe came to write the Battle Hymn of the Republic, the words that she is most famous for. And I bet most of you know at least the first verse of that song. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. But the other verses are not so well known today. And the 5th verse contains an image that is so powerful that most versions of the song today either skip it entirely or change the words. The original 5th verse said, "In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, as God is marching on." As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. I cannot emphasize enough that in 1861, this was not just a figure of speech. Union soldiers sang these words on their way into battles from which many of them would not return. The Battle Hymn of the Republic took the sentiment of James Russell Lowell's abolitionist poem and put it into action. But in 1870, just 9 years after she wrote those words encouraging men to go to war, Julia Ward Howe wrote something completely opposed to war. In her Mother's Day proclamation, she wrote, "Arise, all women who have hearts. Say firmly, our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own, disarm, disarm." How could the person who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic 9 years later come to say, disarm? Now, I have to say, for a long time, I assumed that Julia Ward Howe must have had some kind of change of heart, because more than 1 million people were killed in the Civil War, more Americans than have been killed in all of our other wars before or since combined. And I wondered, did all of the death and all of the misery change her mind about war? But recently, I went through her autobiography and other writings with her and her daughter Florence with that question in mind. Did she change her mind? And it is clear to me now that she did not change her mind about the importance of the battle hymn, and she did not regret the war that her words supported. So why did she write the Mother's Day proclamation? In her autobiography, she says that it was inspired, the Mother's Day proclamation was inspired by the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and the behavior of the victorious Germans afterwards. She viewed that war as barbaric and unnecessary, and she thought that the issues at stake could easily have been settled without bloodshed. So for Julia Ward Howe, slavery was an ongoing evil that every day was creating suffering and death, and she had no qualms about encouraging people to take up arms against it. But at the same time, she thought that most war was unnecessary and immoral. So she supported violent action when she thought it was necessary. But I think that she would have been right at home with the Greenham Common Women's Peace Movement, protesting military buildup and singing about harmony among different people. And this, I think, is the point. Individuals and communities like ours can choose both strategies for fighting injustice. They are not necessarily in opposition to one another. When there is an immediate evil whose continuation is causing present harm, fierce, decisive action may be called for. I am thinking, for example, of the families of trans people living in Florida. And there are many other situations that you might have in your mind. In cases like these, it is not enough to spend all of our time trying to win over the politicians who passed the cruel and unjust laws in the first place. We also may need some direct action. For instance, setting up systems to protect families and to help them move to safer situations. But there are situations where you may be dealing with a person or a group that is not causing immediate harm, and that is, and this is important, acting in good faith. For instance, you might have a relative or a loved one who you disagree with about some issue of social justice that is important to you. And when there is time to talk with someone, and when you think there is a hope of actually changing their mind, then building bridges can create a lasting good. So different situations require different responses. Sometimes we will build bridges, and sometimes we will embrace conflict. But either way, we do need to take sides. And there are two things I'd like you to remember. The first is that other people will be fighting for a cause you care about, and they might choose a different strategy, a different response. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were on the same side. And in fact, recent scholarship has said that some of the apparent divisions between them were exaggerated by the media at the time. And second, no matter how you respond, there are going to be people who are saying you're doing it wrong. If you take direct action, you'll be told that nonviolent protest is the only way. If you protest nonviolently, you will be told that you're being disruptive and you're alienating moderates, and that the only appropriate response is to wait quietly until the next election. And if you campaign for new elected leaders, you will be told that your issue is divisive. So when you are faced with all of this pressure to wait, to calm down, to be reasonable, to temper your expectations, remember that once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. May those words call you to action, thoughtfully, responsibly, and powerfully, as Unitarian Universalists who fight for justice. Blessed be.
Thank you, Reverend Howe. Please rise as you are willing and able for our closing hymn, Voice Still and Small.
There is a voice in your heart, still and small, that calls you towards justice and compassion. Let it guide you to the best way, your own way, of bringing that justice and compassion into the world. For there is no denying when that voice calls, you must answer.
In closing, let us remember that this church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences and beneath all of our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together, in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause in silent witness to that unity.
May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts, now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. And blessed be. And now our service truly begins.
There were bells on the hill, but I never heard them ringing. No, I never heard them at all till there was you. There were birds in the sky, but I never saw them winging. No, I never saw them at all till there was you. And there was music, and there were wonderful roses, they tell me, in sweet fragrant meadows of dawn and dew. There was love all around, but I never heard it singing. No, I never heard it at all till there was And there was music, and there were wonderful roses, they tell me, in sweet fragrant meadows of dawn and dew. There was love all around, but I never heard it singing. No, I never heard it at all till there was you.
Thank you, Abraham. Before you leave, the kids would like to share their posters about peace and justice.
Everybody's invited once a month.